Please. Help me. Her voice suddenly came from the back door of the house. As I was processing this, she appeared with a pale face, swaying slightly. Why? You were just... Yes, the mother-in-law had passed away and had been cremated the day before. What on earth is happening? She slowly beckoned me, and my back was drenched in cold sweat, my mouth dry with fear. Is this a dream? Terrified, I squeezed my eyes shut. My name is Eleanor. Until I met my husband Paul, who is 3 years older, I had no luck in love and led a lonely, work-centered life. When I fell ill and went to the hospital, the doctor who attended to me was Paul. After that, we kept bumping into each other in town and at the supermarket, and we naturally started talking. With his approach, our relationship progressed quickly to marriage. However, living with his parents was unexpected. His father Dean was the director of the hospital where Paul worked, and a strict man devoted to his job. On the other hand, his mother Arya was gentle and kind, welcoming me warmly. If Arya is here, maybe I can manage too. Becoming a housewife at my husband's request, I decided to try my best with Arya's guidance.
I want to have children as soon as possible.
Ever since we got married, Paul had been saying this almost as a mantra. Thinking he would make a doting father, I also made efforts to prepare my body for pregnancy. 2 years later, we had a long-awaited baby boy, whom we named Logan.
Eleanor, thank you. Thank you so much.
In the postpartum hospital room, my husband cried with joy. However, once we were home, he admired Logan from a distance and did not participate in childcare. Today is your day off, isn't it? Could you feed Logan while I hang the laundry?
That's your job, isn't it? If I do the childcare too, what's the point of you being here?
Laughing, Paul returned his gaze to the TV. At first, I thought he was joking, but it turned out he wasn't. It started when Logan began crying at night.
I can't sleep because of the noise. Make him stop crying quickly.
He yelled at me while snapping at the crying Logan. Startled by his voice, Logan cried even more intensely, so I took him to the living room to soothe him. But he wouldn't stop crying, and as I was at a loss, Paul drove us to the entrance.
Don't come back until he quiets down. If I become sleep-deprived, many patients will be inconvenienced. You're his mother, so get a grip.
Feeling like he was talking about someone else, I could only sigh. This is too much. While soothing Logan, I rubbed my sleepy eyes at the nearby park, and Arya came to check on us in her nightgown. Are you okay? I'll take over, so take a little rest. I'm sorry. Thank you. For me, who was rebuffed by Paul, Arya was the only one who understood. Thanks to her help during the tough nights, I managed to get through it. But the difficulties continued. When Logan started eating solid food, Dean began to strictly manage our household finances.
You've been spending too much lately. Aren't you living too freely on someone else's money?
Indeed, expenses had increased for Logan's clothes, diapers, and food. Plus, since Dean and Paul disliked frugal meals, I had to prepare a variety of dishes, which cost money. But we weren't living extravagantly. Rather, the household was strained by Dean and Paul often drinking out late, claiming it was for work. Still, they refused to change their behavior and started cutting back on the money they gave us.
Since you're only doing housework, we don't need to give you extra money. Exactly. Even if your clothes are worn out, you can still wear them. You don't deserve any luxuries like we do.
Paul laughed and agreed with his father's harsh words. For them, drinking out was more important than supporting the family. But we're already making do with very little money. If you cut it any more, I'll have to reduce Logan's meals.
Then stop eating yourself. Are you prioritizing your own appetite over your child's?
I had no words for Dean's cold response. As I was speechless, Arya gently placed her hand on my shoulder and stepped forward. That's too harsh. Eleanor is always working hard for the family.
That's natural since she stays at home. Isn't it presumptuous to think she can be equal to us without earning?
Dean's words were accompanied by Paul's nod and smirk. The kind, gentle face Paul once had was gone. Proud of being doctors, they looked down on housewives like me. Then I'll work. Eleanor is still busy with childcare, but I can work. Dean looked startled by Arya's sudden declaration. Times have changed. It's time to stop thinking of women as servants. We have value too.
You're quite bold. If you're so determined, I'll find you a good job.
Dean exchanged a smile with Paul and left the room. After they left, I immediately ran to Arya. I'm sorry. I was too cowardly. It's fine. I've reached my limit too. I don't want to see you and Logan suffer anymore. Arya was truly impressive, and I swore to myself to become as strong as she was. Early the next morning, Paul woke me up and took me to Arya's room. What happened?
Something happened to Mom.
Arya.
Arya won't wake up.
Trying to understand the situation, I went to her side, but Paul stopped me forcefully.
Dad and I will try to revive her, so don't get in the way. Go take care of Logan.
Though his words were harsh, it was best to leave it to the doctors. Worried, I waited outside the room with Logan. After a while, Dean came out and said, we couldn't save her. Arya had passed away. Why did this happen so suddenly?
There was a bag of medicine by her bedside that she doesn't usually take. It doesn't mix well with her usual medication. I always told her to be careful.
Dean's words left me speechless. From then on, everything happened in a blur. Dean arranged the cremation without a funeral. Even when I protested, Paul intervened to stop me.
Stop being selfish. Mom was old. Accidents like this aren't rare.
Even so, not properly sending off your own mother. Is that really okay with you?
You misunderstand. You're also responsible for what happened to Mom.
Shocked by his harsh words, I couldn't believe my ears. Why would you say that?
You pushed housework and childcare onto her. That must have added to her stress.
I was so shocked by Paul's words that I couldn't do anything. Seeing this, Paul, unusually, took out the trash. While I was in shock, Dean efficiently handled the procedures, and I couldn't properly say goodbye to Arya. I wasn't even allowed to attend the cremation. Dean did it alone.
From now on, you'll do all the housework. No more slacking off.
Dean's cold words deeply wounded my still grieving heart. The day after the cremation, I was still feeling down, but Paul and Dean cheerfully talked about going to the insurance company.
Dad took out life insurance on Mom. We're going to talk about it, so make sure to do the housework properly today. Once we know how much the insurance payout is, let's have a lavish meal tonight.
Ignoring their insensitive conversation, I continued with my chores alone. About an hour after they left, I heard a noise from the back door. "Please. Help me." Then I heard Aria's voice, even though she was supposed to be dead. Am I hearing things? Thinking that, I went to check and found Arya standing there. What? How? I was so shocked that I couldn't speak. Arya had been cremated the day before. Then, who is this? As I thought about it, chills ran down my spine. Come here. Noticing me, she beckoned me over. My legs trembling, I slowly walked towards her. Arya. When I asked, she confirmed Paul and the others weren't around and nodded firmly. I have to tell you something. Please listen before they notice. The warmth of her hand gripping mine proved she was indeed alive. What she revealed next was an unbelievably horrifying truth. After hearing everything, I felt a deep, unrelenting anger. Don't worry, I'll help too. This is unforgivable. My mother-in-law left to hide again, and as I watched her go, I resolved to take revenge on them. A few days later, the insurance agent was supposed to come to our house, so my father-in-law and husband took the day off to wait at home. As I grew increasingly annoyed by their giddy behavior, my father-in-law approached me.
You're still eating thanks to Aria's insurance money. Shouldn't you be more grateful?
That's wrong. I'm not happy about it at all.
Women who can only rely on others are never grateful for money.
He laughed derisively and plopped down on the sofa. Next to him, Paul smirked. Then the intercom rang.
Oh, they're here.
As they went to the door, they froze when they saw who was standing there. What? Why are you here? My husband, pale and trembling, pointed at the person in shock. It wasn't the insurance agent, but my mother-in-law. I came back because I had unfinished business. Next to her stood a man, standing tall and proper, wearing a suit with a lawyer's badge.
That's impossible. I checked her pulse. It had completely stopped.
He was more flustered than I'd ever seen. No wonder. She had been cremated, and he had even collected her bones. Then my mother-in-law fixed her gaze on Paul and my father-in-law and began to speak quietly. You switched my regular medicine, didn't you? I noticed something was off immediately. She started to recount the true story behind the incident. It was my father-in-law who switched her usual medication with something else before she went to bed. I haven't forgotten how you laughed in my ear as I was suffering, unable to speak.
I don't know anything about that. It's all lies.
As my mother-in-law pressed him, he backed away, overwhelmed by her determination.
I checked to make sure. And we had a cremation ceremony. Why are you here?
Maybe God saved me? That night, her heart had indeed stopped. After my father-in-law's final check, she was taken to the funeral home, where miraculously, she regained consciousness. You must have adjusted the dose so that you could deny it if the police investigated. That's why I barely survived. Just before being cremated, she made noise inside the coffin and was discovered by the funeral home staff. Knowing her family was behind it, she decided to hide temporarily. The funeral director, being an old acquaintance, helped me with the plan. We even staged the ceremony. Thanks to the funeral home's cooperation, they successfully deceived my father-in-law. She then presented some documents to the two of them. While hiding, I did some investigating. A $100,000 life insurance policy was taken out just a few months ago, and I knew nothing about it. It was my father-in-law's policy, with him as the beneficiary. Faced with this evidence, my father-in-law was speechless and clicked his tongue in frustration.
You didn't die as you were supposed to, making me look like a fraud. You've disgraced me.
Instead of expressing remorse, he only blamed her. Unable to bear it, I stepped forward. That's not all. This is a crime. You tried to kill my mother-in-law. I won't forgive you. Then, my husband, who had been trembling, suddenly moved behind me and glared at his father.
I didn't want to do it. But Dad made me. I'm a victim too. What? You were the one who planned the insurance scam.
As my father-in-law advanced on Paul, I retreated to my mother-in-law's side.
If you hadn't wasted money on cabaret girls, we wouldn't be in this mess. You spent all our savings, you idiot. You did the same, ordering expensive drinks and being surrounded by young girls. You enjoyed it too.
It was the most pathetic family quarrel I'd ever seen. As we stood there in disbelief, my father-in-law suddenly smirked as if he had an idea.
Right. Arya said I switched her medication, but there's no proof. The evidence would be long gone by now, so you can't prove it, right? Yeah, I threw the medicine packet out that morning, so it's gone. Dad, you're so smart.
Thinking they had found a way out, they didn't realize I had been waiting for this moment. We signaled the lawyer, who pulled out a plastic bag containing the medicine packet. They recognized it immediately.
How is that here? I threw it out.
Yes, but garbage isn't always collected immediately. Paul, who never did any housework, didn't know that trash collection schedules vary. He had thrown it out with the burnable garbage, but that day was for recyclable trash, so our bag was left behind. After hearing my mother-in-law's story the day after the cremation, I retrieved the packet and handed it to the lawyer. Fingerprints from both of you were found on it, clear evidence of the switch. Hearing this, my father-in-law collapsed like a puppet with its strings cut. But Paul, eyes full of tears, clung to my feet.
Listen. Dad's target was you, not Mom.
Oh. And?
You're younger and do housework, right? I protected you because of the kids and all.
Maybe he said this hoping for forgiveness. But I confronted him, veins bulging in anger. So you tried to kill your own mother and expect me to be grateful?
I'm your savior.
Instead of replying, I picked up my phone to call the police.
Please, don't. I needed the money because I was tricked by a woman. Dad did it too. We had to do this to protect the family. Understand?
How could I sympathize with someone who tried to kill Arya over something so trivial? I despise you. The police arrived shortly after I called, and the two were taken away. As the tension released, we collapsed, unable to stop the tears. Later, they were found guilty and sentenced to a long stay in prison. Besides the insurance fraud, they had previously falsified medical reports for money. All this to impress cabaret girls, utterly pathetic. My mother-in-law and I claimed $30,000 each in damages, which they reluctantly paid in full. We used the money to move to a new place and start a new life with our son Logan. We're pouring all our love into raising him to value family over money. How was this story? Don't forget to subscribe to the channel. See you in the next video.
I need $5 million because I want to buy bread for my sister.
Our 5-year-old grandson stole the title deed to our house. He said he wanted to feed his sister because she was hungry. Even though our grandson himself was thin and hungry, he seemed determined to get a large sum of money for his sister. How did it come to this? While bewildered, I tried to protect my grandchildren and wanted to consult my husband, but
I'll throw them in the slammer.
my husband, face red with rage, terrified our grandson. What's going to happen now? My name is Nancy. My husband, Jason, and I retired in our 50s and were enjoying a leisurely life.
Hey, Nancy, please. Our household budget is tight again this month.
Seeing my daughter-in-law smiling while bowing her head only superficially, I felt weary. My son John and his wife Amy moved out of our house 3 years ago and were living with our 5-year-old grandson Harrison and our 2-year-old granddaughter Mary. Since they lived in the same town as us, Amy often came to our house, seeking financial help. They always seemed to be in need of money, making me doubt if they were really working properly. I became worried about my grandchildren and asked several times to see them, but there was always some excuse, and I couldn't meet them.
Come on, Nancy, you have plenty of money to spare, don't you?
You know, Amy, money doesn't just come out of nowhere.
But you both do stocks and investments, don't you?
That's the reason my husband and I were able to retire in our 50s. We decided to spend the rest of our lives volunteering and helping others.
Please, Nancy, help us. If we can't pay this month's rent, we'll be evicted.
First, establish a stable livelihood so you can live without relying on us. We were troubled by her monthly demands for money. Suddenly, Amy's face twisted in anger.
Are you going to abandon your son and grandchildren when they're hungry? You miser! Heartless! You're not even human!
Amy's outburst left me completely exasperated. All right, but this is the last time.
Thank you so much.
As soon as I gave in, Amy's mood improved. But I'm sure she'll come asking for money again next month. Hey, could you let me see my grandchildren? If you're in such financial trouble that you might get evicted, are Harrison and Mary okay?
Oh, they're fine. Don't worry about my kids.
No, I am worried. Can't you just let me see how they're doing? Besides, she had just admitted that they were hungry. Seeing my suspicion, Amy looked annoyed again.
Could you stop meddling in other people's family affairs?
We're family, aren't we?
Just because you lend us money, don't get too high and mighty. Ugh, how patronizing.
I was annoyed by her words, but I tried to continue negotiating. Eventually, Amy relented and said,
I'll talk to my husband.
Later, my son contacted me and said,
We're sending our 5-year-old son over.
The last time I saw my grandson, he was 2, so I was eagerly awaiting our reunion. Then, my 5-year-old grandson Harrison came to visit us. It's been a long time. Do you remember your grandma? I smiled at him as gently as I could, but he just looked around the room nervously. Amy came with Harrison, but quickly left, saying,
All right, I'll leave him with you.
of course, he would be anxious being left alone in an unfamiliar house. Moreover, just as I had feared, Harrison was extremely thin, possibly not getting enough to eat. His clothes were also too big and ill-fitting. This is worrisome. What are John and Amy doing? I decided that whenever Harrison came over, I would at least serve him delicious meals. Additionally, when Amy came to pick him up, I gave her a small amount of money, saying, "Please use this for your children." Amy looked surprised, then smirked.
Thanks for the extra cash.
She kissed the envelope containing the money. I hope they don't use this for themselves. I stressed that it was for the grandchildren, but I couldn't help feeling uneasy seeing Amy's reaction. And there was something else that had been bothering me. It seemed that Harrison had been exploring the house whenever I wasn't looking, often rummaging through drawers and cabinets. When I noticed and asked, "What are you doing?" he would hastily return things to their places. But as soon as I looked away again, he would go right back to the same spots. Harrison came to visit every day, and for about 3 days, he repeated this behavior, making me curious. On the 4th day, "Harrison, dinner's ready." "What are you doing?" I couldn't believe my eyes. My grandson was holding the title deed to our house. "Harrison, that's not a toy. Please give it to me." I extended my hand gently, but Harrison shook his head.
I need $5 million.
I was stunned by his words, but Harrison's face was deadly serious. He genuinely believed that the title deed could be sold for $5 million. "Why do you need money?"
I want to buy bread for my sister Mary.
I decided to listen to what he had to say. The situation in my son's household was worse than I had imagined.
Mom and Dad ignore Mary even when she's crying because she's hungry.
They weren't providing enough food, and they ignored Mary until she cried herself to exhaustion. Harrison must have been thinking about how he could help his sister. When I had asked to see my grandchildren, my son John saw an opportunity for his scheme.
Dad said if I brought the title deed from Grandma's house, we could get $5 million and have lots of good food.
My son and his wife were using Harrison to try and steal the title deed. Using a child who doesn't even understand what $5 million means to commit theft is unforgivable. Seeing my angry expression, Harrison looked anxious.
What's going on, Nancy?
At that moment, my husband Jason returned from his volunteer work in town. I explained the situation to him, and he too wore a stern expression. "Hey, can't we temporarily take care of the grandchildren?" However, he turned red with anger and shouted.
"I'll throw them in the slammer."
Harrison, shocked and on the verge of tears, said,
I'm sorry. Please forgive me.
"Wait a minute, dear." But then Jason embraced Harrison and wept.
Oh, you poor thing. Even though you're so skinny, you're thinking about your sister.
It seemed his anger was directed at our son and daughter-in-law. I sighed in relief. Overcome with sorrow for our grandchildren, I placed my hand on Harrison's shoulder and cried too. Together, my husband and I resolved to take action against our son and daughter-in-law. As usual, I served Harrison a delicious meal. He always ate eagerly, devouring every bite. Staring at the empty plate, he murmured,
I want Mary to eat until she's full too.
That brought even more tears to our eyes. Then, my husband and I contacted our son and his wife to discuss the matter. Hey, can you bring Mary over too? We'd like to have both of them stay with us.
No, she's still only 2 years old and too young.
Are you saying that because you don't want us to see how thin both of them are?
When my husband pressed them, there was silence on the other end of the line.
Hey, stay out of our family's business, will you?
I can't just ignore this situation.
You're trying to take our kids away from us. You monsters.
Amy started screaming again, making any conversation impossible. In the end, she didn't come to pick up Harrison, so he stayed with us. She was probably afraid of my husband and decided it was too difficult to take Harrison by force. Despite being rebuffed by our son and daughter-in-law, we persisted and gathered evidence of their neglect. 3 days later, we went to John's house unannounced.
What are you doing here? Get out!
We're here to take Mary into our care.
We told you to stay out of our family matters.
Our visit caused an uproar. Harrison was staying with a neighbor, and Mary was napping at the time. Despite the commotion, our granddaughter slept soundly. We have proof that you haven't been properly caring for Harrison and Mary, I said, glaring at them. They seemed momentarily taken aback, but quickly regained their composure.
How could you know that without even coming here?
Stop bluffing.
As John and Amy mocked us, I held up my phone. The screen displayed videos of them ignoring a crying 2-year-old Mary while engrossed in their phones, captured at various locations like the park and supermarket.
What is this? Did you secretly film us?
And I took Harrison to the hospital and got a diagnosis. He's clearly malnourished.
How do you have so much time for this nonsense? Must be nice to be retired and bored.
They insulted us, but it was clear their confidence was waning. I shook my head calmly. There's no way just the two of us could gather all this evidence. We had help.
Who helped you? Bring them here! I need to give them a piece of my mind.
We could bring them, but I doubt they'd all fit in this house.
John looked confused. You know we've been volunteering since we retired in our 50s, right?
So what? What's that got to do with anything?
Through our volunteer work, we enlisted the help of the entire town. Everyone except you two.
As my husband laughed, John and Amy's faces turned pale. The townspeople had listened to our story with shock and anger. When my husband asked for their help to gather evidence against you, I continued. Everyone was more than willing to assist. And asked, "Didn't you feel the town watching you lately?" Everyone was keeping an eye on your actions. John and Amy clutched each other's hands, trembling with fear.
All right, prepare to be thrown in jail.
Ah! No!
Wait, don't leave me.
As my husband blocked the front door with an imposing stance, John and Amy, in a panic, tried to escape through the back door. However, both let out yelps and fell to the ground, their legs giving way beneath them. Gathered there were townspeople, ready with cameras and smartphones to document everything. So, what's your next move? There's no escape now, I said as I slowly walked up to them. John and Amy, realizing they had no way out, dropped to their knees and began begging.
We're sorry. We'll change our ways. I promise.
Please, forgive us. We'll take proper care of the kids.
Despite their desperate pleas, no one there was willing to forgive them. I have just one question for you, I said.
What? What is it?
Sensing a glimmer of hope, they looked up with expectant eyes. What did you do with all the money you begged from us and the money we gave you for the grandchildren?
Well,
John averted his eyes, unable to answer, and Amy remained silent.
I believe the answer is right here.
My husband, who had been searching through the other rooms, emerged carrying brand-name bags and sneakers, tossing them onto the floor. They scrambled to gather the scattered items in their arms.
You took our money and spent it on luxury items for yourselves.
You can't deny it anymore. Surrender quietly and accept your fate. At that moment, as if on cue, the police arrived with sirens blaring. John and Amy were forcibly shoved into the police car, crying and screaming, as they were taken away. Afterward, our son and daughter-in-law were arrested and faced severe charges for their actions. We cut ties with them and initiated a lawsuit demanding the repayment of all the money we had lent them. John and Amy now have a substantial debt and will likely have to work tirelessly to repay it once they are released. As for our grandchildren, Harrison and Mary, we decided to take them in and raise them ourselves. When we served them meals, they cried with joy, saying, "Delicious, delicious," as they ate. Now, both have filled out considerably, no longer the gaunt, underfed children they once were. Going forward, we plan to continue living joyful, bright days filled with smiles, alongside our beloved grandchildren.